What's inspired today's talk is the fact that in our modern era, there's a great deal of emphasis being put on each one of us to know our why, to know our purpose, to live with meaning. And if you're anyways familiar with life coaching or the field of mentoring or leadership, even within the self-help realms, there's a lot of talk about why we need to discover our purpose. Now, I'm not disregarding that it doesn't have a place. As we can see from our yoga practice, it does have a place. Perhaps, however, the way it's been emphasized is actually leading to greater unease. We meet people in our lives who get themselves in a tizzy, so to speak, because they are trying so hard to find their purpose, to the point that it feels like until they have done, their life is meaningless. Now, it's human nature to seek out meaning, to seek out relevance. I know for myself, I have this tendency, and I don't think I'm alone in this. And I feel I may have read something in which would stand by this fact that we are programmed to find faces in our environment. Of course, we can see the faces in one another, but even in inanimate objects. I know that when I've been out walking and maybe I'm passing by a building, and then one window in relation to another window looks like the eyes, then there's a little plant growing up and it looks like the nose, and I find a face in it. And this is an ongoing thing. It's at times it can seem relentless that there's just this continuous capacity to find faces in inanimate objects. So there's this push to find meaning where there isn't any. There's this push to find something of significance in something which isn't inherently with this significance. I'm projecting it onto it. I'm giving it significance. I'm interpreting its importance, its relevance, its meaning. And so, while I might do this with faces, and I don't think I'm alone, even when we look at what's coming to my mind now is the design of our cars with the lights at the front and the bumper. There's a smiling face looking back at us when we're stuck in traffic. But this goes to every aspect of our life where we are looking to find significance, meaning in goings on and happenings that perhaps don't necessarily have that meaning. And so we make interpretations. And our interpretations are not isolated events. The importance of the face, we can understand why our interactions are face to face. But the importance we give to other things is being determined by other factors. our upbringing, our own personal history, the people who have given us our values, our beliefs, our culture, our traditions, all of this we borrow from. And so when we're talking about meaning, we talk about yoga as being a methodology for exploring meaning. We think of yoga as being science in terms of its being outlined and codified as a systematic approach for experiencing our being when it's not entangled with the goings on of the outside world. So that we can have a realization that we exist regardless of what's going on in the outside world. So yoga is a methodology, so in that way it's a science, but it's also a philosophy. Now, science, generally speaking, has concerned itself with the mechanics of life, how things work, what things do. It doesn't really have much concern with the why. But philosophy does. Philosophy takes up this baton and it inquires into the meaning of things, the why of things. And so yoga, as both a philosophy and a science, concerns itself with the whys, the whats, and the hows. So as yoga practitioners, we are being informed by two philosophical schools of Indian thought, the first being Samkhya. And Samkhya explains that the purpose of life is to be able to discern ourselves, our existence, as a witness to everything that's going on. So to realize ourselves as the Purusha, the seer, to Prakriti, everything which is manifesting and in a state of flux, everything that we experience. Advaita Vedanta is pushing us to realize that the purpose of life is to see through our own illusion. That the purpose of life is to realize that we are Atman. We are the self, which is one and the same as Brahman, the infinite self. And so these two philosophies explain that this is the purpose of life, for us to realize ourselves as being an undefined, unconditioned experience of continuous beingness, which is not dependent on or defined by anything that is experienced in this manifest world. Now, this puts us in a challenging situation. If this is the purpose of life, to experience the self with a capital S, and to experience it above and beyond the not self, what we might call our personhood, our personalities, our characters, that which is entangled within the whole structure of created reality. If we're going to live according to these teachings, according to this philosophy, we find ourselves challenged by any well, let me see if I can rephrase it another way. We find ourselves challenged because our day-to-day living is the thing that we experience. The very fact that we are entangled in it, the very fact that it is at the forefront of our experience, it makes it very, very real. And so when we talk about the mechanics, the science of yoga, the how and the what's, how we're to live and what we're to do, is a challenge for us because we come in conflict. Do we dedicate ourselves to a series of practices which aim to disregard what we experience as our everyday experience, with the hope that we are fortunate enough to realize what is being taught, what is being shared within these different philosophical traditions? Do we do that? Or do we just engage in life, engage with the lived experience, engage with things as they unfold as the ordinary self, or as these philosophies would say, the not self? And as practitioners, we're faced with this dilemma because for some, it's very attractive, the idea of being free of the conflict of life, being free of the challenges that comes with this created world, our relationships, our duties, our responsibilities, the ups and downs, the challenges, the difficulties. So there's an attractiveness in experiencing something which is other than that, where we're free of that. And so for them, it can be quite alluring to just isolate themselves in a space where they can meditate for long hours, whether it's productive or not, but that's what they're doing, where they can commit themselves to reading texts. And basically, in some manner, it might be a way for them to escape what is the experience of living in this world. For others, they hear the teachings, they might find it very reassuring at some level, but it might be too big an ask, big an ask to start focusing on an experience of being which disregards everything that they have come to know. What about their families? What about their job? What about the things that they own? And so the material experience comes up against the spiritual experience. Are we going to engage or are we going to transcend? And our capacity to choose in either way will be hugely related to our own personal history, our own psychological disposition. It'll be hugely related to how we actually give meaning to what's being shared. How we are able to find that the purpose of this teaching, of this tradition, aligns in some way what we had envisioned to be a worthwhile purpose. So meaning can come from within us. But as you may infer from everything that's been said so far, it quite often comes from outside of us. And this started at the beginning of our life with our parents, our caregivers, those looking after us, where they gave meaning, gave significance, gave importance to certain things. And so in one family, you might see a family which prioritizes and gives extreme importance to certain aspects of life, maybe education, job. Another family might be to music. Another family might be to sports. Even within a family, one parent might give it towards one discipline, one field, one activity, and another parent to another activity. And though we inherit this, so we get it from our caregivers, in our schools, with our peer groups. We also get it from our culture and the different aspects of our culture, which might be religion, which often plays a huge part in culture. And so all of these different areas of the external world influence how we assign meaning to things, the relevance that we give to things, how much purpose things have. So as yoga practitioners, we can justify our sitting for long hours in meditation, for our doing things in a certain way. We can justify it by referring to different texts, different teachers. And we can justify the purpose that we found in yoga. We can justify our why we are living in a certain way, based on what has been given to us through different texts, teachers, teachings. But so too can a criminal. A criminal can be engaging in activities which are not in line with social values. But they can justify their purpose. They could argue it in accord with, well, it's because, and they can give you a rationalized explanation of why it is that they have found that this is the way to live their life, that there's purpose in it, that there's meaning in it. And then you've got the usual experience, which is for people who are raising families. They're working in a job and they're doing their best to support their family. Maybe they earn enough money to enjoy a holiday or maybe 2 holidays in the year. And they go about living their life in a certain way. And they will justify it, and they can justify it by looking to what's going on around them. And they can argue that the purpose of their life and the meaning that life has for them is to do this. So every path we take can be justified in some way or another. The meaning to it, the purpose of it. But all these frameworks that we're using to justify it are usually external. We are reliant on external factors, external structures, external frameworks to determine the meaning of how we live. Now, this is where we can look at the goal of yoga, which is liberation. Yoga aims to support a practitioner in arriving at a point of liberation. And yoga encourages to learn how to discern and discriminate. The goal of yoga is to help us to arrive at a point where the meaning that we get, the purpose that we find, comes from within. And so while yoga has structures, let's call it the mechanics, the hows and whats, which is related to the philosophy, a why. Ultimately, these are just a framework for a practitioner to progressively let go of this reliance on external frameworks to find meaning, and ultimately take up absolute responsibility for the meaning that they give to things. Now, we could, in some ways, draw a parallel here to what Advaita Vedanta calls illusion, the illusion of reality. If the reality we're living is based on our living in a certain way because the meaning to living in this way has been given to us by pre-installed frameworks and structures, then we are living in accord with external frameworks. And so we're living with the idea of being free, but we're actually bound up. In the frameworks, structures which have been offered to us and which we've borrowed from. And yoga, while it is another framework, the goal of yoga is to help us to go beyond all frameworks. And even when we look at the yamas and niyamas, the principles within yoga which are helping us to live with integrity, they're not supposed to become a list of commandments, commandments which we become dependent on and hope to find all our answers in. Instead, they work as a system which is encouraging us to move to a point where we become capable of moving independently, where we are wholly responsible for how we move, how we engage. So when we talk about our why, the emphasis is often on this idea of us having a why which will give our lives meaning. And the people offering this notion can come with an elaborate tale or talk where it feels like what they're saying holds truth. And it can. So when we listen to the TED Talk or we read the book or we hear the different speakers speaking, we can be very moved by what they say because it helps to reassure us. But it doesn't actually solve the problem. And perhaps we can look at it from the point of view that the why of our lives is not something which is fixed and anchored down. We don't simply find our why and then that's it. We can rest back now, settle down. And sometimes when we listen to these talks, it can give that impression. But maybe when we're talking about the relevance of why, we need to think of it more like how a 3-year-old sounds. A 3-year-old is incessantly asking why, why. And maybe for us in our practice, and as we move through life, and we think of living with meaning, we need to consider it from the point of view of meaning comes and goes. And the why that we're asking, we don't ask it once, but we continuously ask it. And we ask it of ourselves in every moment. And so I've titled the talk, Your Why is Irrelevant, because why, as it's spoken about, is often as this arriving at some knowledge, some conclusion. This is it. Now I found meaning. And from that point of view, I find that we can underestimate what it means to live with purpose, which sounds and seems to be more in line with our being willing to ask why all the time. And in this way, to take responsibility. And the doubt will be there, but it's ours to navigate. So maybe if we're going to live purposely, it might mean that we never have a fixed purpose. We keep asking, why?